And welcome in to the Blitz podcast on another episode of our power ranking segment that we've been rolling throughout the summer so far. And today we'll be covering our 21st ranked team, and that is the Atlanta Falcons, who definitely have some interesting pieces at play this year. But are we excited to talk about the Falcons today? I think I'm sensing some hot takes to be like revealed later on in the episode. I don't know. Who knows?
I do have some very fun things to say about this Falcons team. I really, we're going to talk about everybody in a minute, but I like a lot of the pieces that they have on this roster. I think I might be a little bit higher on the Falcons than most people.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like I said, they've got some reason to be optimistic this year, especially over last year. And they've steadily made improvements to this team. I mean, this is a team that post Matt Ryan, I mean, really looked like it was going to be in the stinker for a long time. And they have been in the stinker. There's no doubt about that. But they've definitely made some improvements with some high draft picks. So we'll see what they can do this season. But to start out our evaluations, we got to start at the quarterback position. And we have this team ranked 32 out of 32 quarterbacks. That's really rough, man. Like, I don't know if it should be that harsh. Like, I'm thinking about it now. Like, maybe Baker and Kyle Trask is a worse combo. But it doesn't get much worse than Desmond Ritter and my boy Taylor Heineke as your options going into this year. Desmond Ritter was a late quarterback in a draft class that had no quarterbacks really, and not a lot of hope there. But is there any reason of optimism among these quarterbacks this year? We were talking about it before the podcast. I mean, how quick do you see maybe a Taylor Heineke appearance this season?
Yeah, and we kind of get these episodes back to back with Washington being our previous episode where we're talking about quarterbacks with not a lot of optimism because they were picked late in a draft class that wasn't very good. So kind of funny how tables turned there. It wasn't so optimistic of an approach for Desmond Ritter as it was for Sam Howell. And I think the question.
Well, Desmond Ritter was never like expected to be the best quarterback in the class at one point. You know,
Fair.
like Desmond Ritter wasn't going to be drafted for a while until he had his senior season.
Yeah.
But okay.
And I think the questions of, well, why is Sam Howell, who's a fifth-round pick, and Desmond Ritter, who's a third-round pick, why you got Sam Howell's group higher? And quite frankly, that's because it's Jacoby Brissett as the backup option there, and a lot of the other things that we said about that quarterback room, or really just Sam Howell last week. I don't see the same optimism for Desmond Ritter. I've never been a Ritter guy. I'm a Steelers fan. Steelers were picking quarterback in that draft. There were some rumblings about maybe Desmond Ritter becoming a Steelers fan. I hated that. I just never saw it with him. I don't see it with him here. I didn't see it with him playing for Atlanta last year. Quite frankly, I don't think there's any way that the Falcons aren't looking to upgrade at quarterback by the end of this season, especially with the group of playmakers that they got, this offensive line, this improving defense in a relatively easy division. You have an opportunity to really make the jump. They could have done the same thing that the Carolina Panthers did and went up and got Bryce Young. They were picking at 8th. Carolina was picking at 9th. They could have made that move to go up and get Bryce Young. They opted not to and to stick with Desmond Ritter, and that's fine. But I think 32 is fair. You mentioned something about Taylor Heineke. Maybe we see him early. The thing is with that is I don't think we see him too early because I don't think Desmond Ritter's going to have enough opportunities to make the mistakes that would get him benched that early. Now, maybe by week 8, if, they're running the ball really well and the defense is playing really well and it's not producing to wins because he's not producing in the passing game, maybe they make a change then because I think the way that they run the ball so much, it's not like he's going to be throwing 30 to 40 times a game and making a ton of mistakes. But if he makes mistakes in the few throws that he gets, then that's when I think we start talking about maybe a Taylor Heineke or something else going on here. Who maybe they're in the trade market. If, let's say, Tennessee says, screw it. We're going to roll with Will Levis for the rest of the year, and Ryan Tannehill becomes available. Arthur Smith was Ryan Tannehill's offensive coordinator in Tennessee and has experience with Tannehill. Tannehill's best seasons in his NFL career were with Arthur Smith as his offensive coordinator. So that was just completely. I had not thought of that until 20 seconds ago, so that was completely off the cuff. But could happen, definitely could happen. But I don't get the optimism for some around Desmond Ridder. I think 32 is very fair.
Yeah, like I think he's just like a low, I wouldn't even say like a high floor. Like he's a floor quarterback with really no ceiling that like you could really look forward to. I mean, his ceiling is very average. Like he's never going to be he doesn't have the potential to be one of the best quarterbacks in this league. And he won't turn into that. And the only reason that I think we might see a Heineke appearance before week 8 is because this division sucks. You've got the Panthers, and if they start out struggling, if the Bucks struggle like we predict them to struggle, and if the Saints like start out not as hot as we expect them to, like there could be an opportunity to like lead this division. And if you're like just like waddling it out with Desmond Ridder, I don't think you'll want to do that if you're in a position to like take the division. And I think Taylor Heineke puts you in a better position if Desmond Ridder doesn't show any flashes like early on. So I think we might see a Taylor Heineke transition earlier than possible. I mean, he's one of the, and I'm getting on my homer horse here, but he's one of the better, if not like top 5 backup quarterback options in the league. So gotta like it's a nice security blanket to have in Atlanta, man. And we'll see how it goes, man. And we've got him ranked 32 for a reason, like you said. So, but it does get a lot better when you transition to the Atlanta Falcons playmakers, as we have them ranked 17th out of 32 teams, so right around the middle of the pack. But this team, with how young they are on the playmaker side, they are just going to keep rising the ranks every single season. So we start out with Drake London on the outside, a top 5 wide receiver pick, at least top 10.
He was
just last.
Yeah, he was picked 8th last year, ahead of guys like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, who did outperform him in his rookie season. Now you can point that to the offense or whatever you like to, but he was picked ahead of those guys. He was the first wide receiver taken in that class, and that doesn't look like the greatest selection. I know I grilled it because I was a Garrett Wilson guy. I had Drake London as my wide receiver 3. I did not like that pick at all. He was better than I thought he would be, but I was right about Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave being better, at least at this point in their careers.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a heavy run offense. I mean, like we mentioned before, but Drake London did receive like an insane target share last year, which was like historic as far as rookie wide receivers go. The production, like you said, wasn't up to snuff like we would want it to be, especially considering the target share. But they love Drake London when they do throw the ball. They're looking for number 10, and they're also looking for their tight end, who is arguably a wide receiver himself, and that is Kyle Pitts, he was top 5 2 years ago. And he obviously won a generational tight end. Hasn't really panned out so far. Like, people aren't doubting the talent. The talent is still there. It's just like he hasn't been able to get the opportunities. He's not being targeted in the end zone, stuff like that. So they need to learn how to better utilize Kyle. He is a weapon. And then, got to mention the dude in the backfield. They also spent a top 10 pick on this past draft, and that is Bijan Robinson, the man out of Texas. And I know you have glowing things to say about Mr. Bijan Robinson and a run-heavy offense under Arthur Smith. So what do you see the outlook for Bijan and the rest of the offense looking like this year?
Yeah, I mean, this group of playmakers, the problem with it and the reason why we have it at 17th is the depth, specifically at wide receiver. Matt Collins and Scotty Miller are wide receiver 4s in an ideal scenario, and you've got those guys as your 2 and 3 here. Obviously, they're not going to be the 2 and 3 pass catchers because Kyle Pitts is going to be a de facto wide receiver in his own right. I could see them running a lot of 2 tight end sets with Arthur Smith at offensive coordinator. They could be running even some tight end 3 tight end sets with Parker Hesse as well to go with Jonnu Smith. Parker Hesse going to be like next to the tackle. Jonnu Smith going to be a little bit off of him, and then Kyle Smith as a legit wide receiver is definitely a set that we could see a lot more with Atlanta. But Bijan Robinson, I really can't say enough about this guy. I love the way he plays. People give him LT comps. That's really the only one that I see that like I can point to and be like, yeah, that fits the bill. He's that good. LT is one of the 6 or 7 best running backs ever. And it's hard to say that I think he could reach that with how quickly running backs get in and out of the league at this point. But I think there's a higher possibility that he goes for like 2,000 yards than he goes for 1,000 yards. Like, especially in this offense with the volume that he's going to get in redraft fantasy leagues, he'd be my number 1 overall pick. The only thing that concerns me is how they like to use this running back room. You still have Tyler Algier here. You still have Cordero Patterson here. I do think Cordero Patterson might be potentially available to a team. He does have I think he might have not a significant cap hit, but one of the higher ones among running backs in the NFL, so he could be expendable for them, especially the way that they're able to churn out running backs. I mean, they've even got Caleb Huntley down at RB4 on this team that would be getting snaps for a lot of teams. But if this was just a ranking of the best wide receiver, the best running back, the best tight end, this is probably a top 6 or 7 unit in the NFL. The only problem is that wide receiver depth. I also want to talk quickly about the running back depth again. Tyler Algier would be starting for, I don't know, probably a handful of teams in the NFL. He was 1,000.
Ran for 1,000 yards.
He was a 1,000-yard rusher last year. I remember picking him in like the 16th round, and I was like, dude, watch out for this guy. He's going to be getting a lot of shit. And Cordero Patterson started the year, and by the time Algier finally got it rolling, I had already dropped him because I was like, I can't wait any longer. And like the last 2 or 3 weeks, he has like 300 or 400 yards, gets to that 1,000-yard mark, and I'm not able to reap any of the benefits of waiting for him for 9 weeks to get a starting role. But that's fantasy football for you. But I think that this could very well be a top 10 group by the end of the year. The only thing that concerns me is those 2 other wide receivers that aren't Drake London.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree with you on the running back depth. I mean, I don't even know if they get rid of Cordero Patterson. I mean, it's kind of like the same mindset that I had with the Lions when they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs and they didn't trade Swift at first. I was like, this team's going to throw the ball like 10 to 15 times a game and they're going to run it ridiculous amounts and they're going to have every running back in their backfield involved. Who knows? Maybe they do that in Atlanta. Like, I mean, Cordell Patterson isn't really he kind of proved he was in between the tackles back for a little bit, but you don't really have to use him like that. So maybe they use him on some end around stuff and then like balance out. I mean, obviously Bijan will be the primary, but like balance out Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. Very stark difference there between 2 running back prospects. But yeah, I think they're going to get everybody involved, and this offense is going to be a lot of fun. And with them running as heavy as they do, it'll open up a lot of opportunities for Kyle Pitts and Drake London this year. So in that way, Bijan helps this offense. So, all right, let's move on from the playmakers and let's dive into this very impressive offensive line for the Atlanta Falcons. You could argue very strongly that this is the reason that they have been such a strong running team, especially last year. This offensive line burst onto the scene, and we've got them ranked in the top 5. I mean, we've got them ranked as the 4th best offensive line among the rest of the league. And, I mean, damn, looking at these names going down, it's an exciting group, man. Anybody hopping off the page?
I mean, the main guy that hops off the page is obviously Chris Lindstrom. Had a career year last year, had one of the best years from a guard that we've seen in a long time, finished with a absurd 95 PFF grade, which is one of the best grades that, it's I think it's on a 1 to 99 scale or 1 to 99.9 scale. 95 is pretty damn good. I don't think there was a single player that graded higher than that last season. So he had a phenomenal year last year, earned himself a nice contract extension to go with it. They've also got two above average tackles here in Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry. I believe Caleb McGarry is one of those two tackles also got extended this year. So good for those guys as well. You do have, I wouldn't call them question marks, but new guys in here, or one new guy in here, and then Drew Dahlman. I don't know how I feel about Drew Dahlman starting. I think I'd rather have started Matt Hennessy. I'd want to have my best five out there, and I think Matt Hennessy is one of the five best linemen on this team, and he has played center in the past. I think that if Drew Dahlman doesn't work out, it will be Matt Hennessy going in at center. And then you have Matthew Bergeron as well, rookie from Syracuse, ends up going in the second round. He was a late riser in the process. He was probably projected as a day 3 pick, even leading about 2 weeks up to the draft, starts moving into round 2. I remember Mitchell even mocked him at 20 at one point, which I thought was a little insane. But he ends up going at 40 to the Falcons, and not too many better schemes that he could have gone to where you're surrounded by this much talent. And all those things that I said about Bijan and this running game are backed by this offensive line. When you have an offensive line like this, a coach that loves to run the ball and is able to really scheme it up like this is why I'm saying I do think that Bijan Robinson could be the best running back in the NFL by the end of the season. I don't even know if we'll really be having a conversation about it, to be honest. I think that maybe his youth and the fact that it's only 1 year might be leading to it, but would not be surprised if he grades as the highest graded running back per PFF and has the most rushing yards and every good thing that you can say about him because of this offensive line and because of his talent.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's the best running back prospect to come out since Saquon. And, people think Saquon, they think, he kind of really didn't live up to that hype. That first season that he had was ridiculous, record-setting, amazing, all of the above. And you could see a lot of similar production from Bijan Robinson behind this line. And also, if you're going to put the 32nd ranked quarterback group out of 32 teams behind an offensive line, this is certainly the offensive line or one of the offensive lines that you would pick. So got to feel good about that. So, all right, let's move on from this impressive offensive line group to dive in to this front seven, and we're less impressed by them. We've got them ranked 28th. And let's go around the block here a little bit. Calais Campbell they brought in, I believe, on a 1-year deal. Obviously, veteran. Obviously, he's not the old Calais Campbell he used to be, but still a very solid, productive player. Got Bud Dupree on the outside. They got Jarrett still on the line. He showed flashes last year. So, who do you see breaking out here? And do you see, do they get any better than 27th, or where we've got them ranked 28th? Do you see them ranking out any better than 28th at the end of the season? Is there potential?
I think there's potential for sure. You got a veteran group up front with Calais Campbell, David Onyemata, and Grady Jarrett. Grady Jarrett really hasn't showed much since that Pro Bowl season he had, I believe, in either 2020 or 2021. So you're really hoping that he can return to that form as one of the best interior rushers in the NFL. David Onyemata was another guy brought over from the Saints. We'll talk about Caden Ellis, who was also brought over from the Saints here. I'd imagine that was a lot of Ryan Nielsen, who is the new defensive coordinator there, who was a defensive coach in New Orleans, bringing a lot of his guys over. Calais Campbell, like you said, not the guy that he once was. I was pretty surprised that he didn't return to Baltimore. I know that they cut him, but there were conversations about maybe them re-signing him just to a lesser deal just because they couldn't afford to pay him that much, but he ends up going to get a 1-year, $7 million deal from Atlanta. You do have Bud Dupree here, who I completely forgot signed with Atlanta. I think it was a couple weeks ago. I was sitting there thinking, I was like, where did Bud Dupree go? Because I remember there were conversations about the Steelers maybe bringing him back in after the Titans let him go. Obviously didn't happen. He's here in Atlanta. You got Lorenzo Carter on the other side. I would not be surprised if Arnold Ebiketie ends up taking that job from him. Lorenzo Carter has been kind of underwhelming in his time in the league. Arnold Ebiketie, second-round pick last year, was getting some first-round buzz towards the end of the process. But could be a solid player for them. Was not very good in year one, but maybe a year two jump from him. And then this linebacker pair, you got Caden Ellis, like I said, coming over from New Orleans. Was one of the breakout candidates that I was thinking about here, but we ultimately ended up going with Troy Anderson, who's also going to be playing linebacker for them. Freak athlete. We talked about him a little bit last year, but he played quarterback and running back at Montana State. Ends up converting to linebacker. He's only been playing for 2 or 3 years, but is an elite 100th percentile athlete. Just needs to figure out the position, just needs to get more time playing the position. But overall, I don't know how much improvement you're going to be seeing from this group, just because it is a lot of veteran presence. You don't have, like, it's not like the Texans where we're looking at like, oh, well, if Will Anderson is this good, we could be seeing some significant improvement from them. They don't really have a guy like that on this unit. This is, outside of quarterback, this is going to be their biggest weakness next year, and it's really going to be carried. This defense is going to be carried by the presence that the secondary brings with all the overhauling they did to that group.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's not really much to talk about when it comes to the front seven. I mean, you pretty much covered it all. It's an aging veteran group, which can be useful, you know? I mean, it's certainly not bad that you have some vets because when you look at this secondary, they could definitely carry this defense to success this year. I mean, it's dirty. So let's dive into it. We've got them ranked 12th out of 32 teams, which almost seems too low. I was looking at it last night. And, I mean, if you go around here, they got A.J. Terrell. They took high-value pick. I mean, he's showed great things so far in the league. I mean, I would consider him a top 10 corner in the league right now, if not even higher. But they also traded for Jeff Okudah, who was looking to be that same type of corner out of Ohio State. I mean, very high draft pick a few years back for Detroit. They ended up trading him to Atlanta because he had the injury and then wasn't really showing a ton coming off the injury. So, I'll kick the tires on Jeff Okudah. So that's a great acquisition. And then you get Jesse Bates, one of the best safeties in the league. I mean, he's top 10 in my opinion. Probably. I mean, it's really close. There's a lot of talented safeties, but I would put him top 10 for sure. So that's like, I mean, that's a really dirty group, man. I mean, you got those three guys, and then you got some nice complementary pieces, man. So what do you see the secondary
Yeah,
doing
I think
this year?
this is one of the better groups in the NFL. I think 12 is fine. I know like Mitchell texted us and was like, how did they end up 12th? I guess he wasn't as high on this group as the rest of us seem to be. You do break out the wallet a little bit. You go get Jesse Bates.
Really?
Yeah, I
What the
know.
fuck,
I know.
Mitch?
But you
Come
go
on.
break out the wallet. You go get Jesse Bates, who's one of the, I don't know, 4 or 5 best safeties in the NFL. And bringing him in is a big culture change. You can see that along with the front seven as well, where they're paying up to bring in a Calais Campbell, a Bud Dupree, a David Onyemata, a Caden Ellis. Like, they're tired of this being one of the worst defenses in the NFL, so they're trying to make improvements to it. They also go get Jeff Okudah for a 5th-round pick. He's going to fit perfectly into Ryan Nielsen's new scheme that he's going to be bringing here, that press man, bump and run scheme that he runs, that Dennis Allen has been running in for years in New Orleans. I think this also will help A.J. Terrell. Had a phenomenal 2021 campaign, played like one of the 2 or 3 best corners in the NFL. Was not one of the 2 or 3 best corners in the NFL last season. Took a big fall off. He's kind of had a very up and down career. His rookie year wasn't very great. Year 2 was very, very, very good. Last year wasn't very great. So if history repeats itself, we should be in for another career year for A.J. Terrell. And that's what Atlanta's hoping for here. Because if A.J. Terrell can have a career year, you even get baseline play from Jeff Okudah. You know what you're going to get from Mike Hughes at this point. You know what you're going to get from Richie Gray. And at this point, those 2 are solid starters in the NFL. But with Jesse Bates, Roman back there, and A.J. Terrell and Jeff Okudah, and this new scheme that they're going to bring, I do think this could be one of the 10 to 12 best secondaries in the NFL for sure. The only problem is that pressure up front that you get from a lot of these other teams, where they're going to have all day to throw. So these guys got to cover for longer, and when you're running man coverage and you're running man coverage for a long time, it's pretty easy to lose at some point. Somebody's going to lose eventually. But regardless of that, I still think that this is a very good group with a lot of room for potential. Outside of the playmakers, I think this group has the most room to grow because of the youth on it and because of the raw talent on it.
Yeah, for sure. I was questioning Jesse Bates sitting inside the top 10 for safeties because I knew I just looked at a list that Ari Mirov put off right before the episode, and he's got Jesse Bates ranked as the sixth best safety in the league. So like that's awesome, man. This team could be really dirty in the secondary this year. We just got to see what happens, you know. But let's move on from the secondary and let's dive into the coaching for the Atlanta Falcons this year. And not too optimistic, man. I mean, it's not terrible. We've got them ranked 26th out of 32 teams, and they are headed up by Arthur Smith, who's very run heavy. Seems like he's a very old school football kind of guy with a lot of new school weapons. I mean, he's got Drake London, Kyle Pitts to play with, now Bijan Robinson. Like, this is a very exciting offense. Maybe they don't have the right guy at the helm. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that now that I'm looking at it, I think 26 might be a little bit unfair to Arthur Smith and this staff. Arthur Smith is one of the best run game coaches in the NFL at this point. He's been able to create a fantastic run game out of a guy like Tyler Algier, out of Cordero Patterson a year before that. I think a lot of the hate that he gets is from not being, not getting Kyle Pitts as involved as the fantasy community specifically would like him to be. And while I don't want to be the guy that defends the head coach here, that's not his job. You know, I understand that everybody wants to get him involved. Kyle Pitts was a 1,000-yard player in his rookie season. That very rarely ever happens. It's just nobody talks about it because he only scored one touchdown. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to Matt Ryan being one of the worst red zone quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. I mean, Julio Jones had that same problem where it felt like, he'd have these 10-catch, 180-yard games, 0 touchdowns because Matt Ryan could not operate in the red zone. And it was a lot of the same last year with Marcus Mariota. They're not passing as much, and he's not exactly the greatest red zone quarterback himself. He hasn't even played with Desmond Ridder yet because just as he was getting going last year, Kyle Pitts ends up tearing his ACL or MCL, one of those two, but he was out for the season after an injury. Dave Ragone, Mitchell so lovingly, or not lovingly, but I guess surprisingly brought up, former NFL Europe MVP, Dave Ragone here. Really not going to be doing he's not going to be calling the plays here. That's going to be Arthur Smith calling the plays on offense. So, it's kind of one of those situations where he's just kind of got the job and title. He's the quarterback's coach here as well, so he just gets the coordinator name. I talked a little bit about Ryan Nielsen and what he's going to bring. He bounced around through college for working his way up through New Orleans. He's going to run that Dennis Allen bump and run, aggressive, man-heavy scheme. It's nice to see, to be honest with you, with all these teams starting to move into that quarters coverage where they're playing these soft zones and just letting 4 guys attack. This Falcons defense is going to be aggressive, and that press man scheme is going to be something that not a lot of these teams deal with on a week-to-week basis, so that could also be helpful for them. To 26, I mean, I'm not putting them too much higher than 26. Maybe they jump Riverboat, but we're not the problem with Arthur Smith is how much does he relate to players? Like, he doesn't have that Tomlin, that Vrabel vibe to him. Like, we see it when he's dealing with the media, like we saw with the Marcus Mariota situation where they were asking him, where's Marcus Mariota? And he was kind of very quick to be like, we don't care where Marcus Mariota is. And I remember the Kyle Pitts situation where he's like, quite frankly, we don't care about your fantasy teams. So he's never going to have that CEO type tag attached to him just because he can't connect with the players in that way. But as a pure X's and O's guy, I still think he's phenomenal.
Maybe he jumps Riverboat Ron, but I don't think the coaching group as a whole. I mean, we have Eric Bieniemy and Jack Del Rio too. Like Jack Del Rio was a former head coach at one point, but this is not a Commanders episode. We already covered that. But I mean, you're right. Like he has put together a very impressive run scheme and a very impressive run game. Like, and the numbers have been really good with like not the best running backs in the league, but you draft Drake London with a very high draft pick. You draft Kyle Pitts with a very high draft pick. And like you got to throw the football. Like management expects you to throw the football if you're drafting guys like that. Like you got to get them involved. And I know I sound like an angry fantasy manager here, but I mean, it would be one thing if the Falcons were winning games and they won the division last year with this great and fantastic run game. That would be one thing, and then I would shut the fuck up. But that did not happen. The Falcons weren't very good, So, like, despite putting together a fantastic run game, that hasn't been winning football games. You know what could win football games? Throwing the ball to Drake London, throwing the ball to Kyle
what
Pitts.
could lose them football games? Desmond Ridder throwing the football. That guy is our 32nd ranked quarterback. If we did this last year by position, I don't think the Marcus Mariota-Desmond Ridder tandem would have graded much higher than 32. But I will say, if there is a sense of optimism, the last 5 weeks of the season, Drake London has 12, 11, 9, 8, and 8 targets. The last 4 of those weeks were Desmond Ridder at quarterback. The only thing there is that's with no Kyle Pitts. So we have not seen Desmond Ridder, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts all on the field at the same time. We don't know what that's going to be like. We also don't know what Bijan Robinson is going to be. Bijan Robinson, there's a reason why I'm talking about him. He could be one of the best receiving backs in the NFL, and that's not even the thing that he's the best at. He's, I saw this clip of him, like, he stacked a guy on a post in college, like, was out wide, ran a post like a wide receiver, and won. Like, there's not too many running backs that can do that. He could also be playing a role here in the passing game as well. I think he might even be playing a bigger role than a guy like Drake London is, because Desmond Ridder can find Bijan Robinson, and Bijan Robinson can make those plays after he's already caught the ball that maybe Desmond Ridder can't throw Drake London open for.
If Desmond Ridder can't find like very high draft picks, if you're saying this shit about Desmond Ridder, then he cannot be the starter. If he cannot start this season.
We got him at 32.
Taylor Heineke is capable. Like, is he great? No, not even in any sense of the word. But he is capable of throwing the football down the field to high-value targets. Like, he can do that. And if we're having a conversation about Desmond Ridder not being able to do that at all, then I think we have a major problem.
I think that might be Taylor Heineke's greatest quality is it was something I talked about last year, was Taylor Heineke's, in his head, I imagine probably, is saying, I can't do this myself, but Terry McLaurin can. But Jahan Dotson can. And
he's got the big energy, dude.
Something like that.
Like, he's got like the confidence.
He's got the confidence in the other guys.
The confidence
to be like, look, if I throw this down to Terry McLaurin can do this. I can't do this, but Terry McLaurin can. So maybe he'll think, oh, Kyle Pitts can probably catch this 50-50 ball that I throw up to him. And that's going to be where a lot of the success is had if Taylor Heineke does end up coming in for them. I'm not going to predict that to happen. Would it probably be better for them in the short term? Probably. But we'll see on that. Like I said when we were talking about quarterbacks, I can't see this team having the number 1 pick next year because of Bijan Robinson, because of the secondary, because of Kyle Pitts and Drake London, because of this offensive line. But I can't see them walking into next year with Desmond Ridder. So you've really got to figure out a way to either move up in the draft, maybe a quarterback becomes available. I don't really know if we're ever going to have that 2021, or I guess 2022 offseason ever again, where there's 4 franchise quarterbacks potentially available. So it's tough for Atlanta. Atlanta may have missed the boat this year. They could have went up and got one of those guys. Imagine Anthony Richardson. I know Bijan Robinson wouldn't have been here if they went and got Anthony Richardson, but I just want to think about.
Still got Tyler Algier, and like it's would have been a possibility for sure. So, all right, let's move on from the coaching status for the Atlanta Falcons, and let's dive into the schedule for the Falcons this year. And damn, dude, all right, we've got the easiest schedule in the National Football League this year for the Atlanta Falcons. And as I mentioned before, they play in a very bad division. And they don't really play too much outside competition. I mean, I'm looking down this list, and I mean, their toughest opponents, I mean, obviously, it's the division. You got Green Bay, Detroit, Minnesota. The Jets are going to be rough. But, I mean, this is a very nice schedule for the Atlanta Falcons and should set up nice for them to possibly win the division. Their over-under is set at 8.5, which I believe is the highest mark that we've had so far for any team. I'm going to go the under on that. I'm going to go, that's too much, man. I don't think this team can win 9 games this year. Like, it's, especially with the talk that we just had, like, if Desmond Ritter's the starter, they're going to fucking kick the can down the road for the first, 8 weeks, like you were mentioning, and then they'll be out of the race. They won't be able to do anything. So if they have the wherewithal to, realize that, hey, this division's winnable, that's what happened with Ron. We wanted to play Haskins, but Ron was like, no, we're in a position where we can win now. We can win this division, so why would I just take a chance on the project rookie quarterback? That's not what you want to do. And I know Desmond Ridder isn't a rookie, but anyway, 8.5 is way too high of a mark, despite having the easiest schedule in the league. I'll still take the under. What do you take?
I'd feel a lot better about this if it was at 7.5. And I know that the reason why it's not is because of this division, because of the weakest schedule in the NFL. I'm looking at this schedule. The only game that I can say that they're probably going to be more than 5-point underdogs in is probably at the Jets, maybe at Jacksonville, and maybe at Detroit. But I'd confidently say at the Jets. Other than that, man, all these games are winnable. You've got 6 winnable games within your division right there. You're playing the AFC South. Yeah, you're playing the AFC South. You've got to play 3 other rookie quarterbacks. You get the Texans pretty. Yep, you get the Texans North pretty early. You've also got the NFC North as well, which is the weakest of the NFC conferences outside of your own. You're getting the weakest AFC conference as well, or the weakest AFC division rather. 9 wins feels high for this team. Like I said, I'd feel much better about it if it was 7.5. But somebody's got to win this division, man. And I feel like I've said this about every team in this division. I'll tell you what, man. We've got the Saints coming up. Obviously, the Saints haven't been revealed yet. We got the Saints coming up shortly. I feel better about the Falcons than I do about the Saints. I don't know if that was me just sitting here doing this episode, talking myself into it. But at this moment, I'd probably have the Falcons higher than the Saints. We'll talk about the Saints a little bit more once we get up to them. But the Saints are old.
I'm a Derek Carr stan.
I'm
Can't wait to talk about that.
That's why, while I feel much better about Derek Carr than I do Desmond Ridder, I don't see room for improvement for Derek Carr. And while I don't see a whole lot of room for Desmond Ridder, it's possible because he's young. It's possible because he's young. I think we've seen the best of Derek Carr, and it was 2 seasons ago. That will be the best that Derek Carr will ever be.
Desmond Ridder doesn't have any tools.
He's got 4.5 speed.
Yeah, okay, that's true. And in a running offense, that's
accurate.
Great.
I will give, or no. I'm getting him confused with wasn't very accurate. Does have a solid arm. Does have a solid processor. I had that backwards. But I'm going to go over. I don't feel great about it. If I had to do anything, I would not do it. Quite frankly. If I had to pick one, I wouldn't. I
wouldn't do it. Good to know. Okay. Let's move on from the schedule and start to wrap it up for the 2023 Atlanta Falcons, ranked 21. Their offense across the board, according to the Blitz Pod consensus, is 22. And their defense comes out at the same ranking, so 22 there. And it's funny that we have ranked 22, 22, and then we have 21 as their overall ranking. But, the excitement factor can push them over another spot. But their championship window we also don't have another year on here, man. So we got closed and a quarterback away, which is exactly what we were saying yesterday. So you feel a lot of the same that you did about the Commanders for the
Yeah, it's
Falcons.
kind of the same situation. I mean, we talked about it. Two late round quarterbacks without a whole lot of attachment to them. It's not like there was a first round pick invested in them, like we talked about with like a Justin Fields, for example, or the Patriots with Mac Jones. You know, the point where they'd be very quick to invest in another quarterback. Um, I think that, like I've said at least 3 times this episode, they could be looking for a quarterback next year. And that's why it's hard to put a number on this, because if they go up and get Caleb Williams, they're right in it. If they don't, and they keep doing this thing like they've done the last 2 years, where they go sign a Marcus Mariota, they bring in a Desmond Ritter, they sign a Taylor Heineke. I think Arthur Smith is confident enough that in his running game that he can think, oh yeah, we don't need to go pony up for a quarterback. Let's just draft 3 more running backs, another guard, and we'll be fine with this running game. And they'll never be in that championship window. They'll be able to compete for this division year in and year out. They might make a playoffs here, make a wild card here, but you're never going to really be a championship team if you don't go get that superstar quarterback. And I kind of feel similarly with this team, maybe less on the defensive side than I do on the offensive side, but it kind of feels like San Francisco, where it's like, man, if you just get a Jimmy Garoppolo type in here and make some good picks on defense, could this team be one of those teams that doesn't need a superstar quarterback to be a championship contender? I could definitely see that, especially with a mind like Arthur Smith, formulating the run game. I just don't know if Desmond Ritter is even that guy for you, is even that Jimmy Garoppolo type. I think that's what his ceiling is, quite frankly. But I think this was, we had the Commanders, this team, and then our next team is probably going to be listed as a quarterback away. The difference is I think they might have their guy in the building, but we'll see as far as that goes. I know that a 22nd ranked offense, a 22nd ranked defense, and a 26th ranked coaching staff doesn't usually equal to 21, but you guys forgot that they have one of the 2 or 3 best special teams in the NFL, with Cordero Patterson returning kicks, Younghoe Koo kicking. No, I'm just kidding. That
Oh
doesn't.
yeah, oh yeah.
That
Young
is not
Wei
a
Koo,
factor.
baby.
That is not.
One
Well, I
of the
mean,
best.
it is a.
I took him early in the Dynasty mock yesterday. I'm a
Oh
big
Lord.
fan, man. Big fan, Mr.
Um,
Koo.
I
But
don't.
yeah,
Yeah,
I agree with everything.
I think 22. It kind of sucks having the 4th ranked offensive line, the 17th ranked playmaker group, which we definitely, I think all of us can agree, could very well be higher by the end of the season, and still be 22 ranked on offense, and that's because you've got our last quarterback room, and that is, as far as ranking on offense goes, that's at least 50 to 60% of what we're thinking about here. Defensively, that front 7 is what's going to bring them down here. I think the secondary has a lot of room to improve. Maybe we are ranking them at their ceiling a little bit, but there's very talented players on that group that, quite frankly, not a lot of these teams below us have. I don't think any team below the Falcons has a player on Jesse Bates level in their secondary. No. I mean, maybe you want to argue Antoine Winfield. Maybe you want to argue a J.C. Horn. But I don't think there's a guy as good as Jesse Bates, and I don't even think there's a guy as good as A.J. Terrell. Maybe J.C. Horn you're arguing, but I think that secondary really carries this defensive ranking. And like I said, we're still a quarterback away here in Atlanta.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, there's going to be other teams that we talk about that are just a quarterback away. But, I mean, the Falcons are in a really good position. I mean, they spent high value picks on high caliber pieces for their offense that are really young. Drake London came into the league super young, so he's going to be with this team, or at least in the league for a long time. Bijan's going to be in the league for a long time. So is Kyle Pitts. And that's something that I'll say that they have up on the Commanders. Like, they have the young pieces that are like prominent, and yeah, I mean they're set up to move into the future, and be successful now, but they're just that quarterback away, like we talked about. So, all right, that just about does it for the 21st ranked Atlanta Falcons in this year's preseason power rankings. Looking forward to grinding out the next 20 teams that we got left. But we'll catch you on the next episode.